Welcome back, everybody. Over a decade ago, Al Gore's documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, brought worldwide attention to the threat of climate change. Now the former vice president is out with a follow-up, an inconvenient sequel, Truth to Power. It looks at just how much has changed in the last decade. Lindsey recently sat down with Al Gore to talk more about the film.
The most criticized scene in the movie An Inconvenient Truth was showing that the combination of sea level rise and storm surge would flood the 9/11 memorial site. And people said, what a terrible exaggeration.
Hurricane Sandy slammed into New York City last night, flooding the World Trade Center site.
It's been 10 years since An Inconvenient Truth. Did you expect to make a sequel?
I did not, no. But there are two big changes in the last 10 years. Number one, the climate-related extreme events are way more common and more deadly. But the second big change in the last decade is that now the solutions are here. And this movie leaves the audiences with the feeling of real hope. We can solve this. We need the political will. But political will is a renewable resource, and we're seeing an upsurge of activism.
Let's talk a little bit about that hope that is talked about in the film. Can you give us some examples of the good that's happening right now?
Well, the cost of electricity from solar and from wind has come down so rapidly. It's almost like computer chips or mobile phones. It's amazing. And in much of the world, the price has gone below the price of electricity from fossil fuels, and soon it will be much lower everywhere. Now batteries are coming way down in price, and that's important because you can use the solar energy at night and the wind energy in the day, and it's going to revolutionize the energy sector. And the Paris Agreement was an historic breakthrough.
It's crunch time at the climate change conference in Paris.
Still some really tough negotiations going on.
What would it take to shift to renewables? I'm talking about breaking the impasse. Virtually every nation in the entire world agreed to get to zero greenhouse emissions. It is unprecedented. Justin Trudeau and his team helped to bring it about, by the way. They were a very positive force in Paris. Virtually every nation in the world has agreed to go to net zero global warming pollution midway through this century. And even though Donald Trump tried to pull out, so many of our governors and mayors and business leaders have said, we're still in the Paris Agreement. We're going to meet the commitments regardless of what Trump does.
Let's talk about Trump. President Trump, you had a meeting with him, I believe in December. Tell me, how does that go? You walk into the room, you sit down with him, and what is talked about exactly?
Well, that's not the only conversation that I have had with him since the election and since he entered the White House. And I have protected the privacy of those exchanges, but I will tell you that my purpose was to convince him to stay in the Paris Agreement. And I actually thought there was a chance he would come to his senses, but I was wrong.
How do you feel about the current political climate?
I was concerned when he pulled out of the Paris Agreement that other nations might use that as an excuse to pull out themselves, but I was very gratified almost immediately afterward when the entire rest of the world doubled down on their commitments, almost as if the rest of the world was saying, well, we'll show you, Donald Trump. And a lot of countries, like India, for example, have really increased their commitments. India just announced that within 13 years, all of their new cars and trucks are going to have to be electric vehicles. That's amazing. They've been shutting hundreds of coal-burning plants and vastly expanding solar. China's reduced its emissions 3 years in a row, also vastly expanding solar. We can win this, and I'm convinced we will win it, but it needs grassroots support.
One of the elements in the film that is very apparent is how frustrating this could be for you, you and a lot of other people.
The next generation would be justified in looking back at us and asking, what were you thinking? Couldn't you hear what the scientists were saying? Couldn't you hear what Mother Nature was screaming at you?
Where do you get your drive from? Where do you get the energy to keep going when you're met with such opposition for those that say climate change doesn't exist?
Well, honestly, it's a privilege and a source of joy to have work that justifies pouring all the energy you have into it, and it gives you energy back in return when you feel like you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, what feels so strongly like the right thing to be doing, then it gives you energy.
Truth to power. You highlight, obviously, power politicians in this. What about the power of people, the average person? You know, I look at my children and I think, how do I explain things to them? What can they do? What can I do? And what would you say the sort of number one thing that the average person could do?
Learn about it. Go to this movie. It'll give you all the facts you need on the problem, the solutions, and what you can do. Then use your voice. Win the conversations on climate. Use your vote. Communicate to any candidate who approaches you and any elected official that represents you that this is important to you. Use your participation as a consumer to make the climate-friendly choices. That sends a powerful signal to the business community.
How is Canada doing on the world stage?
Canada was one of the most powerful and influential voices in the Paris conference. Prime Minister Trudeau's government played a key role in assuring the success of the Paris Agreement. I have personally appreciated his leadership and his speeches. I don't agree with all of the things that he does, but overall, he has been a breath of fresh air. He has been a source of inspiration to the global community, and I really appreciate what he's doing.
And we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
An Inconvenient sequel, Truth to Power, it actually opens today in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, with a wider release across the country on August the 11th.